Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. State attorneys general across the nation demanding Biden reactivate an ICE operation that targets sex offenders. That's as ICE data shows increased sex offender arrests and border cities see increased human smuggling. President Biden begs Americans to get the COVID-19 vaccine after touring a Pfizer factory. He says good signs are here, but warned of still being in the pandemic's jaws. California and Florida are on opposite ends of lockdown policies, but oddly enough, they share similar virus numbers. A White House advisor speaks about the connection. What if you could have two right answers to a math problem? Oregon's Education Department promotes an anti-racist math teacher training program that says this is one solution to combat white supremacy. And Washington holds a potential winning card it could leverage against Beijing. Without it, Chinese airplanes can't fly. State attorneys general across the nation are demanding the Biden administration reinstate an ICE operation that targets sex offenders. Operation Talon is now canceled under ICE's new narrow priorities for deportations. The attorneys general say the decision to cancel this operation is baffling and sends a message that sex offenders won't face consequences in the U.S. NTD's Melina Weiskup has the story.
Missouri's Attorney General Eric Schmidt joined by 17 of his counterparts in other states in a letter to President Biden. They're warning that canceling this ICE operation is an ill-advised decision that empowers sexual predators to victimize America's women and children. Operation Talon was a nationwide ICE operation to target and deport convicted sex offenders, now blocked under Biden's new deportation directive. The attorneys general cite a range of sources to express why canceling the operation is a big mistake. For example, ICE data shows that in 2017, 1% of illegal persons arrested by U.S. Border Patrol were convicted sex offenders. By 2020, that number jumped from 1% to 6%. And these offenders oftentimes victimize other illegal immigrants. A Polaris Project summary shows that foreign nationals make up the majority of victims of sex and labor trafficking in the U.S. An officer in the border city of Loretto says they've seen an increase in human smuggling.
Lately, we've seen upticks over the last, I would say, 6 months with relationship to human smuggling cases.
And human smuggling increases victims' chances of falling prey to human trafficking.
So when they get here, they still owe that amount of money to the cartel that actually moved them into the United States. And what happens often is they'll go all the way through to a final destination city, and then when they're there, they'll spend the next 2, 3, sometimes 5 years paying off that debt because they still owe that amount of money to that cartel.
So canceling Operation Talon means now cartels responsible for human trafficking will be less likely to face consequences for their sex offenses. That's why the 18 attorneys general are urging the Biden administration to immediately reactivate the ICE operation and to send a message to sex offenders that they are not welcome in the United States. Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
And starting today, thousands of migrants will begin to be processed to enter the U.S. The Biden administration rolling back Trump's Remain in Mexico policy. Now hundreds of migrants per day will be processed for a total 25,000 people by the end of phase 1 of the plan. And Biden paid Michigan a visit and toured a Pfizer factory. There, he begged Americans to take the vaccine when it's their turn. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on that visit.
We all know there's history in this country of having subjected certain communities to terrible medical abuses in the past. But if there's one message to cut through to everyone in this country, it's this: the vaccines are safe. Please, for yourself, your family, your community, this country, take the vaccine when it's your turn and available.
President Biden said this after touring the Pfizer factory in Kalamazoo, Michigan. He said they're on track to having enough vaccine for every American by the end of July. But that doesn't mean all will be used. Some Americans turned it down, even in the military.
I think our initial look, and this is of course very early data, is acceptance rates are somewhere in the 2/3 territory, and of course it varies by different groups.
According to the general's data, this means that about a third of all servicemen are turning it down. Biden says the average daily number of vaccinations has nearly doubled since the week before he took office, but it's not over.
But despite the progress, we're still in the teeth of a pandemic. In a few days, we'll cross 500,000 Americans who will have died from COVID-19. That is almost 70,000 more than all the Americans who died in World War II over a 4-year period.
Biden also touched on his nearly $2 trillion pandemic relief bill, saying Congress needs to pass it. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
It's the Sunshine State versus the Golden State. California and Florida have vastly different lockdown policies, but their virus numbers paint a similar picture. NTD's Christina Kim takes a closer look.
Florida and California are on opposite coasts and have had largely opposite lockdown approaches. So when it comes to the pandemic, you wouldn't expect many similarities between the two. But take a look at their cases. According to the CDC, Florida has a total of 1.8 million cases. Adjusting this for population, this means over 8,400 cases per 100,000 people. There are 136 deaths per 100,000. Let's look at California. California has a total of 3.4 million cases. Putting this into context, it's 8,600 cases per 100,000 people and 120 deaths per 100,000. Johns Hopkins University data shows the number of cases as a percentage of the population. California's is roughly 8.8%, while Florida's is around 8.3%. Appearing on MSNBC Live, White House COVID-19 advisor Andy Slavitt was asked why California's numbers aren't that different from Florida, even though California is, quote, basically in lockdown.
Look, there's so much of this virus that we think we understand, that we think we can predict, that's just a little bit beyond our explanation.
California has been one of the strictest states since the pandemic. Governor Gavin Newsom implemented stay-at-home orders, limiting gatherings and shutting down businesses. Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis has taken a different approach. After issuing a lockdown order in April, DeSantis opened up, saying, quote, no lockdowns, no fines, no school closures. Slavitt didn't give any further explanation on why the states have similar virus trends, but he says that more masking, social distancing, and vaccines will lessen the spread and make the virus go away quicker. The White House advisor notes that variants make things harder to predict. Christina Kim, NTD News.
The possibility of the U.S. rejoining the Iran nuclear deal is higher now that President Biden is making it clear he wants to re-engage in talks with Iran. NTD's Allison Lee has more.
President Biden is sending an inviting message to the Iranian regime that the U.S. is willing to start talks about rejoining the 2015 Iran nuclear deal.
The United States and Russia, notwithstanding other competition, extended the New START Treaty for an additional 4 years once I was sworn in. That's why we said we're prepared to re-engage in negotiations with the P5+1 on Iran's nuclear program.
Speaking to the Munich Security Conference on Friday, Biden elaborates on how he plans to engage with the Iran.
And we're going to work in close cooperation with our European and other partners as we proceed. Look, the range of challenges Europe and the United States must take on together is broad and complex.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken also confirmed on Thursday that the U.S. will rejoin the deal if Iran comes back into compliance. On the issue of communist China, Biden says he welcomes competition.
Competition with China is going to be stiff. That's what I expect, and that's what I welcome. Because I believe in the global system Europe and the United States together with our allies in the Indo-Pacific worked so hard to build over the last 70 years.
He says the U.S. has to push back against China's economic abuses, but later adds that competition should not block out cooperation.
We cannot and must not return to the reflective opposition and rigid blocks of the Cold War. Competition must not lock out cooperation on issues that affect us all.
Biden gives climate change as an example of issues where the U.S., Russia, and Communist China should all cooperate. He also signals his willingness to engage even more with European allies. This as Biden announces a halt to Trump's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Germany. Reporting by Allison Lee, NTD News.
Biden's team is looking to rejoin the old Obama-era Iran nuclear deal. But Israel isn't too happy about that, now warning of a nuclear problem. NTD's Miguel Moreno has the Prime Minister's response.
The State Department is open to rejoining the Iran nuclear deal, a deal that's supposed to stop the Iranian regime from developing a nuclear bomb. But Israel's Prime Minister sent a warning saying the deal would do the opposite. His office said Israel believes that going back to the old agreement will pave Iran's path to a nuclear arsenal. Israel is in close contact with the United States on this matter. Under the deal, Iran is allowed to enrich some uranium, but they admitted to breaching the limit in 2019, about a year after President Trump withdrew from the agreement. Trump called it a one-sided deal that foolishly believed a murderous state sponsor of terrorism would only use its nuclear program peacefully. But Biden's team says they'll rejoin if Iran behaves.
Of course, the proposition that you have heard from this podium, that you have heard from the President of the United States, that you have heard from Secretary Blinken, it of course remains on the table if Iran resumes its full compliance with the deal.
The former State Secretary Mike Pompeo, after receiving an award for championing Jewish values on Thursday, said that in his view, people will no longer deny the threat Iran poses.
And while the next administration may choose its own tactical plan, I don't believe it's the case that anyone will ever again deny the threat that the Islamic Republic presents to the United States, presents to Israel, presents to Arab nations in the Gulf.
Returning to the deal would also lift Trump's economic sanctions on Iran. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
A new abortion law meets with resistance. The South Carolina governor signed the heartbeat bill into law Thursday, banning most abortions after a fetal heartbeat is detected. But now the abortion provider Planned Parenthood is suing.
This is very important. This is one of the most...
Moments after Governor Henry McMaster signed the fetal heartbeat bill into law, Planned Parenthood sued, effectively preventing the abortion law from taking effect. The CEO of Planned Parenthood South Atlantic calls the bill blatantly unconstitutional. Planned Parenthood has similarly challenged other states trying to pass laws restricting abortion. Many are still tied up in the courts. Pro-life advocates are trying to get the issue before the U.S. Supreme Court in the hope that the now conservative majority will overturn Roe v. Wade, the 1973 ruling supporting abortion. But the Biden administration has declared its commitment to codify Roe v. Wade into law, something Planned Parenthood has advocated for years. The abortion provider has expressed its support for the administration and says it plans to push bold agenda items under Biden and Harris. Reporting by Grace Coulter, NTD News.
And this just in, U.S. District Judge Mary Geiger Lewis, an Obama appointee, has ruled in favor of Planned Parenthood. The judge granted a temporary restraining order on the law. And due to Roe v. Wade, Geiger said Planned Parenthood is likely to succeed on the claim that the act is unconstitutional. And with the Biden administration in the White House, a pro-life activist expects to see more work done at the state and local level. NTD's Grace Coulter speaks with Lila Rose to get her take on the administration's abortion policies.
Since President Biden took office, the White House has repeatedly dodged addressing his stance on abortion. When Press Secretary Jen Psaki was asked about his abortion policies, she refused to directly answer the question and instead said this.
But I will just take the opportunity to remind all of you that he is a devout Catholic and somebody who attends church regularly.
Lila Rose, the founder of the pro-life organization Life Action, says Americans need to be aware of the serious deception by the Biden administration regarding abortion. While the president professes to be a devout Catholic, a religion that carries clear messages about protecting the sanctity of life, Lila says she thinks he's using the religion as a cover.
The president is using the Christian religion as a cover for his extreme policies and his promotion of abortion. And that is simply the worst kind of lie. Again, it's the worst kind of lie, and it's what needs to be exposed.
She says most Americans aren't aware of the extreme pro-abortion position of the administration. This is likely because of Biden touting his Catholic faith. Rose says when people do become aware, they're deeply concerned. Since taking office, Biden has rescinded the Mexico City policy, a policy that stopped U.S. taxpayer dollars going to abortion services and expansion overseas. And he's committed to codifying Roe v. Wade into law. Biden has also denounced his past support of the Hyde Amendment, legislation that prohibits federal funds from being used for abortions. Rose says the Biden-Harris administration is the most pro-abortion administration to ever take office. And she says not only are the civil liberties of preborn children in danger, but also pro-life activists.
For example, his own vice president, Kamala Harris, has been on the warpath against pro-lifers since she served as Attorney General of California. She was the one who sent her state agents to raid the apartment of pro-life undercover journalist, my friend David Daleiden.
Rose says we can expect more pro-life work to be done at the state level. Rose and her organization will also continue work to protect the sanctity of life through education. She says ultimately, policy is not the answer to ending abortion. It's a change of culture and the way we view it.
This is about the truth versus a lie. This is about the killing of innocents versus the love for them and the support of their lives. So we can hope to convert and win other people to our side by being examples of both truth and love. So that's the ultimate message of Fighting for Life.
Rose says policy is important, but that an internal change in the heart of every person is more important than law. Grace Coulter, NTD News.
Statues of former presidents like Abraham Lincoln and George Washington could be taken down in Chicago. These statues are among 41 monuments under review. NTD's Christina Kim speaks to a political science professor on the topic.
Chicago's Mayor Lori Lightfoot recently announced a public forum to re-examine 41 monuments and whether they should be taken down. The site doesn't give reasons as to why these figures are controversial, but has a description of the figure and statue. Lightfoot says this is to, quote, address the hard truths of Chicago's racial history and will be an open, democratic way to find, quote, new ways to memorialize Chicago's true and complete history. Political science professor Evan Gerstmann says the impact of taking down all of these statues would be very negative.
But I think if we start taking down statues of people like Lincoln, Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, I know the left bristles at the idea that they're anti-American, but I don't think you can say that the people who are most responsible for founding and preserving our country are unworthy of being honored.
He says the move carries a message that is deeply anti-American. But he notes having a factually based discussion on this matter can be constructive, and that dialogue is a better way to address the issue than using violence to tear down statues.
I hope as this goes on, people realize how complex these questions are, right? So I think a series of public debates might be really helpful. The key is that it be based on facts and less performance.
He says some figures like Franklin or Jefferson should be honored, and the monuments can mention their flaws. And notes the path forward is for the people to decide.
I don't think there's anything the government can do to get over that. People have to eventually decide this is not how they want to live, and that they want to speak and want to engage with people who disagree with them.
Adding this willingness to engage is a step towards unity. Christina Kim, NTD News.
An Oregon teachers training program says math has elements of white supremacy and racism. NTD's Christina Kim explores the Marxist origins of this ideology and the details of this, quote, anti-racist training program.
Oregon's Education Department is promoting a training program to help teachers, quote, develop an anti-racist math practice. The program is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and partners with many education and math organizations. According to the toolkit, teachers must work to, quote, dismantle white supremacy in math classrooms by visibilizing toxic characteristics of white supremacy.
This is talking about injecting into a hard science ideas of oppression and supremacy. And as critical theory does, it takes this notion of the postmodern notion of really no absolute truth and sort of sprinkling that throughout.
Critical theory has origins in Marxism, which separates the world into oppressors versus the oppressed. Critical race theory takes that framework and looks at the world through a racial lens, separating people into racist and anti-racist. Education expert Jonathan Butler says this idea says people should look at narratives to describe the world. In other words, there are no absolute truths, only narratives.
This is talking about injecting into a hard science ideas of oppression and supremacy.
This toolkit says it's white supremacy for teachers to ask students to show their work or focus on the right answer. Teachers are encouraged to ask their students to come up with at least 2 answers that might solve a math problem. A reference workbook similarly says the belief in objectivity is a characteristic of white supremacy. It claims it's racist to believe there is such a thing as being objective or neutral. Instead, one should assume that everybody has a valid point.
But what this is doing is taking a very political and I think extremely circular and frankly logically incoherent concept and sticking it into math.
The fact is, American students struggle with math. And Butler says injecting this ideology into math is especially not helpful for students given the situation. According to a 2017 Pew Research poll, when comparing the average math score for 15-year-old students, American students rank 9 slots under the average and 94 points below the top-scoring country, Singapore. Add the pandemic, students have fallen back considerably in math, scoring an average of 5 to 10 percentile points lower than the previous year. Butler clarifies this doesn't mean educators don't want to be sensitive towards students with difficult backgrounds. But this ideology isn't what it seems to be.
And there is this sense that it sounds righteous and justified. But once you scratch the surface, and it doesn't take long, what you find in critical race theory is, frankly, intolerance and a new form of bias. And that's what's being perpetuated here.
Butler believes parents should know what their children are being taught and that parents should have more choice in their children's education. Christina Kim, NTD News.
With technology dominance, the U.S. has cards it can play in its relationship with China. And one of these cards is airplanes. NTD's Juliet Song and an aviation expert have the details.
With the ongoing tension between China and the U.S., one expert is reminding Washington that it has a potential winning card, aviation technologies. That's because without American technology, Chinese airplanes can't fly.
Right now, other than the structure of the aircraft, that is to say, the skins, the skeleton, everything like that, about 100% is imported or built in cooperation with U.S. and Western manufacturers.
Abulafia says for an aircraft, the engines are all the muscles, and electronics controlling the plane is the brain.
And all of these are basically Western designs, and in the case of the engines, outright imports from the U.S.
He says it would be hard for China to create its own substitute.
Recreating a Chinese engine would take so many years and billions of dollars.
Beijing has been trying to catch up for decades, but making an airplane is no simple matter. Right now, China can build the shell of the airplane, but when it comes to all the technologies that make it fly,
that is all still imported or built with a great deal of assistance and U.S. or Western design. So in other words, the answer has been a lot slower than hoped for, and all of the progress that has been made has only been made with big imported programs.
He adds all jetliners in the world are built globally, and it would be virtually impossible for a country to build an airplane on its own.
If you could do it, you'd be guaranteed of a rather bad aircraft, because an aircraft designer needs to be able to shop everywhere for the best technologies. So could China do it? Yes, probably in about 10 or 15 years with billions of dollars spent, and they would have a very bad aircraft as a consequence of that.
And right now, the Biden administration has the card in its hands. That's because last December, the Trump administration issued an order that makes it very difficult for U.S. companies to export aviation technologies to almost 60 Chinese companies. It remains to be seen if the Biden administration will keep the order in place. Juliet Song, NTD News.
An explosion in a New York City apartment building injured 6 children and 3 adults. 1 adult and 1 child critically injured. 2 people were rushed to the hospital, and fortunately no one died. NTD's Melina Wisecup has the details from the blast.
A mother having to risk it all. She tossed her baby out of a window to escape the blast. A babysitter caught the child, and the mother followed behind. Neither injured from the free fall, but they and their neighbors struck with fear from the explosion.
This loud boom that shook my whole house. It took out 2 of the windows. As soon as I heard that, I came outside. I checked, and then I seen all this going on, and it was scary. It was scary.
A crew now cleaning up debris that shot across the street and bricks that buckled under the pressure. The blast so powerful it sent the front door plunging into power lines.
It's a shame. There's so many people that live here. I still hope that everyone in the hospital right now recovers, has a good recovery. I'm praying for them and all that.
The cause still unknown. It happened from inside a 3-story building on Paulding Avenue Thursday afternoon. The building is now being looked at for further damage and to see if the structure can be repaired. New York authorities tell people that if they smell gas to leave the area and call 911. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
The U.S. Coast Guard makes a major drug bust at sea. It seized nearly $160 million worth of cocaine off the Pacific coast in just one of a week. Here's Eileen Ang with more on the story.
The Alameda-based Coast Guard seized over 9,000 pounds of cocaine from January 26 to February 1st. The drug was carried in 3 separate vessels. The trafficker's port of origin was not publicized. The seized cocaine is worth about $156 million. 9 suspected drug traffickers are now in custody. The Coast Guard used its commissioned vessels, known as cutters, for the operation. Cutter Monroe busted a fishing vessel on January 26 and discovered 1,300 pounds of cocaine. Hours later, it intercepted a second vessel and seized over 3,400 pounds of the drug. Having back-to-back cases lasting 31 hours pushed our limits, but our crew took on the challenge, said commanding officer of the Monroe, Captain Blake Novak in a statement. On February 1st, Cutter Berthoff seized over 4,300 pounds of cocaine. Both commanding officers praised their crew's teamwork. Last April, the U.S. Southern Command increased counter-narcotics operations in the Western Hemisphere to intercept drug trafficking in the Caribbean Sea and Eastern Pacific Ocean. Eileen Ng, NTD News, California.
California authorities drawing fire for their virus vaccination policies. The state's latest guidelines shocking some for who now gets priority. NTD's Annie Wang reports.
The California Department of Public Health is prioritizing cannabis workers over some other essential workers for vaccination. The state's latest vaccination guidelines say medical marijuana workers are in the same top slot as frontline healthcare workers, Phase 1A, while teachers and law enforcement officers are placed a step lower in Phase 1B. And non-medical workers involved in growing, producing, storing, transporting, and distributing marijuana are classified as food and agriculture workers in Tier 1 of Phase 1B, even before education and childcare workers, emergency services, and seniors over 65 years of age. Some say this prioritization is a direct result of lobbying from California's powerful cannabis industry. In 2020 alone, California retail stores sold $4.4 billion worth of cannabis products, representing about a quarter of legal sales in the U.S., about the same as Colorado, Washington, and Oregon combined. The head of the state's largest public school system last week tweeted, "Cannabis delivery drivers before school bus drivers and teachers," saying it makes no sense to him. As of January 2021, the state has issued about 10,000 commercial cannabis licenses throughout California, but vaccination sites may not be equipped to quickly determine whether a marijuana store is licensed to sell medical marijuana or not. As a result, some non-medical marijuana workers may be receiving vaccines along with frontline medical workers. California has received at least 8.25 million doses of the vaccine. So far, the vaccination rollout has been a source of public scrutiny and confusion. Reporting by Annie Wang, NTD News, Los Angeles.
Someone has to find the way to build the Great Dome. Completely new, completely original.
It's just clear as day. The media, whether it's broadcast, cable, or print media, has become extremely biased. And I started looking online for alternative ways to get information. And I saw an ad for a free trial. And I looked at it and I said, Epoch Times. I mean, come on, this is end of days type of stuff. I mean, what are they going to be talking about here? And I said, well, it's a free trial. Let me dig in. Is it giving me both sides? Is it giving me an objective point of view here? I have looked for opportunities to see where they might be biased, and I don't find it. It has given me a level of trust in media that I didn't think I'd ever get back. I love the Epoch Times because it has renewed my faith in the idea that a reliable, responsible, non-biased source of information is available. And I can say that I love it because of that.
A Chinese professor is getting a lot of attention on social media. A longtime anti-America fighter, he's just been found to have secretly settled down in the U.S. NTD's Tiffany Meyer has more.
A social media post shocks Chinese netizens. It comes after extreme winter weather conditions in Texas accidentally exposed a longtime anti-American fighter who had secretly settled in the U.S. It's not Chinese professor Chen Ping's first time in the spotlight. Last year, a video of a speech he made went viral. It compared differences between the U.S. and China and triggered a heated online debate.
If you make an income of 2,000 yuan per month in China, which is less than 1,000 US dollars, you'll be far happier than those who have 3,000 US dollars per month in the US. The people in the US are now living in very miserable conditions.
He actually made a conversion mistake in his comments. 2,000 Chinese yuan is equal to less than 300 US dollars. So he was really saying with the equivalent of less than $300 a month, Chinese people can have a better life than Americans who make $3,000 a month. He also gave his opinion on why living in America is miserable.
There are no subway systems in the US, so what can you do? Drive a car, but it costs so much money to drive a car. There's also insurance. It all adds up, so the US is in dire misery.
Chen is a part-time economics professor at 2 renowned Chinese universities. He also has ties to the US. He got his doctorate from the University of Texas at Austin in the 80s. And he works as a foreign researcher at Columbia University. His speech comparing the US and China came as a surprise for many Chinese people. Some of them refuted Chen's claims with facts about driving costs and housing prices, as well as their own life experiences. But one of his latest tweets has put him back in the public eye. In the post, he explained he lives in Austin, Texas, and is suffering because of the state's rolling power outages brought on by the severe winter storm. In the background of his video is his house. The new information drew sarcastic and harsh responses from netizens. One of them wrote, if Chen hates the United States so much, he should come back to China as soon as possible. A professor like him can get a few thousand yuan in China. Another said, quote, did Chen go to America to experience a miserable life? Isn't it far happier to make 2,000 yuan in China than it is making 3,000 US dollars in the US? Many netizens reprimanded the hypocrisy of encouraging Chinese patriotism while he lives abroad. They say Chen is a good example of how many famous anti-American figures operate. They make a living off anti-American ideals, but enjoy the country's privileges. A comment from the Treasury Secretary could mean big news for China tariffs. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says the U.S. will keep tariffs on Chinese goods in place for now. But she also asked the new administration would evaluate what they, quote, think is appropriate going forward. Yellen says the administration is reviewing the U.S. approach to China and that there are a range of issues where they're seeing unfair practices, like forced technology transfers and giving subsidies to high-tech industries. She noted the administration wants to hold China to its international obligations in these areas. Former President Trump imposed tariffs on Chinese goods in 2018. Trump did so to pressure Beijing to narrow the trade deficit between the two countries. The trade deficit means the U.S. buys more goods from China than China buys from the U.S. In 2018, the U.S. had an over $400 billion trade deficit with China. That number dropped to over $300 billion last year.
Electric car maker Tesla is having a tough time in communist China. We speak to experts to find out why the Chinese regime is going after the company. NTD's Chen Han has more on that.
The Chinese regime appears to be going after electric car maker Tesla. 3 weeks into February, the company has been through a series of setbacks. 5 Chinese regulators summoned Tesla over quality issues. Chinese media also ramped up coverage of consumer complaints, and the company is recalling over 30,000 vehicles that have quality issues.
The Chinese regime is concerned about the survival of other electric car makers.
The Chinese regime approved Tesla's request to open a plant in Shanghai in 2018. At the time, local authorities provided favorable conditions, including low-interest loans and cheap lands. Tesla became the first Western car maker that fully owns a plant in China. But experts say there's also a favorable condition for the Chinese regime. The regime wants to use Tesla to develop other industries that are closely related to car making.
The regime's goal wasn't to just let Tesla sell cars in China. The auto industry supports a chain of secondary industries, and the Chinese regime's goal is to have the secondary industries take root in China. But the regime also doesn't want the company to grow so fast that other competitors are facing a dead end.
Tesla has been growing fast in China, perhaps a bit too fast for Beijing. In 2020, Tesla's sales in China hit over $6 billion. That's more than double the figure from the previous year. Tesla says it would strengthen self-inspection and internal management after being summoned. It remains to be seen what the future holds for the car maker in one of its biggest overseas markets. Chen Han, NTD News.
How should Europe respond to the CCP's efforts to influence the continent via its own media operations? We spoke to 2 German lawmakers about it. NTD's Christian Watchin reports.
When UK regulator Ofcom banned Chinese state media CGTN 2 weeks ago, the channel lost its license in the UK, but that's not all. In Germany too, CGTN must stop broadcasting since its license is tied to the UK's. And here too, there's growing concern over its political control.
The channel is ultimately controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, and there are clear guidelines from the Chinese authorities. And you have to recognize that at the end of the day, for the CCP is all about propaganda.
But CGTN insists it's editorially independent from the party. Observers see the CCP intensifying its influence campaign via its media organizations worldwide, making use of the free speech tradition in the West.
Can the Chinese Communist Party say anything about the issues in Germany? Why not? Only then it should be clearly labeled and not camouflaged somehow. You have to say clearly that this is information or a PR program of the Chinese Communist Party.
In response to the UK move, 1 week later, the CCP banned BBC World News in China.
We have to make it more clear to the Chinese that there are limits. And I also firmly believe that if we do that, united in Europe, that we can then have an impact on China.
Before the ban, Ofcom had put CGTN on notice for broadcasting false confessions, including of British national Peter Humphrey. The EU now has a Magnitsky-style mechanism for sanctioning individuals involved in human rights violations.
The official at the channel is often only executing orders, but we have to grab the people behind it, and they can often also be named. There now seems to be investigations, and we must hit them with sanctions.
The question remains, can Europe be united in its response to the CCP influence campaigns? Christian Watchin, NTD News, Berlin.
Coming up, major U.S. airlines say they would adopt a voluntary international contact tracing program. They'll relay that data to the CDC if travelers provide information. And Ford's recalling 153,000 older vehicles. The company's trying to find some missing Takata airbag inflators that are potentially deadly.
나로 유치원 폐쇄 명령서입니다.
전 폐쇄 명령 받아들일 수 없습니다.
유치원 폐쇄 명령이라.
좀 들어간 건 어떻게 됐어? 도저히 방법이 없대?
정일도 사장님을 대신해서 제가 대신 말씀드리면 안 되겠습니까?
Major U.S. airlines say they would adopt a voluntary international contact tracing program. Colette Luke has more.
American Airlines, Delta Airlines, Southwest Airlines, United Airlines, and other major airlines said they had committed to collecting contact tracing data from passengers traveling into the United States and to relaying that data to the CDC if travelers provide information. In August, Trump officials rejected an effort to require airlines to collect contact tracing information from U.S.-bound international passengers after some senior administration officials cited privacy concerns. And back in February 2020, airlines protested when the CDC issued an interim final rule requiring them to collect certain data from international passengers, including phone numbers, to help with contact tracing. The rule was never enforced, but airlines argued that they could not provide such information, especially from passengers booking tickets through third-party websites, though airlines backed setting up a website and a mobile application for passengers to send contact information directly to the CDC. The head of the Airline Trade Association Airlines for America, Nick Callio, said airlines were hopeful this new voluntary effort and international passenger testing requirements adopted last month by the CDC will lead policymakers to lift travel restrictions.
A New York City restaurant just fired a waitress for asking to wait to get the virus vaccine. The waitress says she and her husband are trying for a baby and they're concerned about the vaccine's effects on pregnancy. NTD's Patrick Hayden has the details.
34-year-old Bonnie Jacobson started working at the Red Hook Tavern in August and had good reviews. Earlier this month, the restaurant emailed employees saying, if you choose to get a vaccine, here's what you need to know. Jacobson expressed her concerns about getting the vaccine because she was trying to get pregnant. She said her manager initially understood, saying she wouldn't be required to get it. But then days later, the restaurant changed its mind, making it mandatory. She emailed her employers saying she didn't want to get it yet and needed more time. They fired her 2 days later. Jacobson says she's not an anti-vaxxer but has concerns around pregnancy. She thinks it's more important for her 68-year-old diabetic father to get the shot before she does. The CDC says the risk of mRNA vaccines to pregnant women and unborn children are unknown because they haven't been tested on pregnant women. The restaurant owner told NTD, "No one has faced these challenges before and we made a decision what we thought would best protect everyone." He says they've updated their policy so it's clear to staff how the process works and what they can do to support them. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
Mazda tops this year's list of best vehicles. Consumer Reports' top picks for 2021 named Mazda Best Overall Mainstream, and Best Reliability. The automaker beat out more expensive brands like BMW, Porsche, and Lexus. Honda showed the most improvement on the list, increasing 10 spots into the top 5. Experts say Honda scored higher because of improved reliability. Ford is recalling 153,000 older trucks that may have obsolete Takata airbags. Some vehicles could have had the faulty airbags installed even after the main Takata recall was complete. Ford identified over 144,000 Ford Ranger trucks from 2004 to 2006 that might have the obsolete parts in them. It also identified nearly 9,000 in Canada. Ford says 45 inflators are missing, so they're recalling any vehicles that might still have the hazardous parts. The defect sometimes leads to airbag inflators bursting, sending deadly metal fragments flying. It's already caused the largest auto recall in U.S. history. And major car makers are waking up to an uncomfortable reality. When there's a shortage of silicon microchips, phone makers and other big tech names get priority.
The world's big car makers are waking up to an uncomfortable truth. When there is a shortage of silicon chips, as there is right now, they lose out to big tech. Major brands including Volkswagen, Ford and General Motors have all had to cut output as semiconductors run short. About $800 of silicon goes into a modern electric vehicle. The industry as a whole spends about $40 billion on chips every year. But right now the silicon is being swept up by makers of smartphones and other consumer electronics. They're enjoying a boom in demand from consumers stuck at home. And chip makers prefer Apple, Sony and the like as customers. They spend more and buy more advanced semiconductors. One tech analyst told Reuters that Apple spends more on chips than the entire auto industry. German car makers persuaded the country's economy minister to press Taiwan for action on chip supplies, but with little apparent result. Chip makers complain that car firms don't understand their business. One told Reuters an auto firm had suggested it run a night shift to increase output, not realizing that 24-hour production was the norm anyway. Now Infineon, the biggest supplier of chips to the car industry, will commission a new plant this year. But Asian semiconductor foundries continue to give priority to big tech. Analysts at IHS Markit estimate that leaves production of 1 million vehicles at risk in the first quarter.
Poland could pass a law that would lead to major fines for social media companies. That's if they censor users over who supports certain ideologies. The country's Deputy Justice Minister, Sebastian Kaleta, told Fox News that social media companies have been targeting content that praises traditional values. He said they've been banning people or removing posts under a so-called hate speech policy. If the new law pass, any platform that restricts users for ideological reasons would face fines of $13.5 million unless the content in question is also illegal under Polish law. The country would set up an arbitration committee to oversee disputes. Kaleta said freedom of speech is not for anonymous moderators working for private companies to decide. He said that's what elected officials and the national body are for. Coming up, a 13-year-old therapy dog wins an award for lifting people's spirits. The dog's owner said the pet saved his life. Learn more after the break.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format, where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
Thirteen-year-old English Springer Spaniel Max from the Lake District is the first pet to be awarded the PDSA Order of Merit. It's for his extraordinary service to society. NTD's Joanna Conway has the story.
After a road accident, Kerry Irving was finding it incredibly difficult to get out of the house. His wife encouraged him by asking him to go for a pint of milk. He just happened to notice a little brown muzzle poking through a fence. It became his goal to go out to see Max every day. One day the owner came out and Kerry asked if he could take Max for a walk.
The first walk was literally a 50-metre walk further up the road.
And so began a very close bond. Short walks turned into longer and longer walks.
We set off one day and we walked Ben Nevis.
After this, the idea of walking up Ben Nevis suddenly dropped into his head. One day they set off. Every step, Max was with Kerry, supporting him when he faltered.
And we got to the top, and it was probably the most emotional day of my life, because in that walk, I relived 6 years of pain.
One day, Max's owner told Kerry they were leaving town and asked if he would like to adopt him. That was the best news he could ever hear. His anxiety disappeared because Max would be right by his side all day. Kerry retrained as a locksmith so Max could travel around with him. He started posting their walks on Facebook, and Max in the Lake District was born. 2 more puppies joined the family, and Max took them under his wing. Facebook took off. They started doing meet and greets and began charity walks. Maria Dickin, founder of PDSA, awarded Max for his role as a virtual therapy dog. Throughout lockdown, Kerry and Max's twice-daily walks have lifted many people's spirits on social media, keeping them positive and giving them hope. Joanna Conway, NTD News.
The NBA is holding the 2021 All-Star Game in Atlanta next month. That's despite a number of top players' concerns about playing amid the CCP virus pandemic. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver confirmed in a news release that the game will go on. A lot of NBA players have said they're not looking forward to All-Star events during the pandemic. The game and its festivities will take place inside a mini bubble environment and keep players and coaches confined to a single hotel. Players will need to stay at the hotel except during the event activities. There will be no fan activities or ticketed events, and the events won't stretch a full weekend either. The All-Star Game 3-point contest, skills competition, and slam dunk contest are all scheduled for the same day. And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.
Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.